Thank you for the invitation. I share some thoughts and reflections with you. The blade, the bullet, and the bomb know no morality. They have one purpose only: to kill and to injure. Those who wield these weapons of destruction have choices. They are moral beings who have chosen the way of violence. This choice is informed by their beliefs, and their beliefs informed by their chosen cause or ideology, or both. If choosing the way of violence is based upon an extreme ideology, then they have adopted an uncompromising view of the world and how it should be ordered, which requires them and their co-believers to spare nothing or no one in pursuit of their goals. Barbarity is unleashed, violence spirals, and any semblance of humanity abandoned. They appropriate for themselves the appearance of an irresistible force. However, as in the paradoxical proposition, what will happen if an irresistible force meets an immovable object? Nothing in nature is absolutely irresistible, and nothing is absolutely immovable. In the gritty realities of power struggles, action and reaction happen by degrees, and each mirrors the worst aspects of the other, and thus violence breeds violence. You may imagine I'm describing ISIS or Daesh. I could equally be describing Cromwell's model army or the fascist regimes of Europe in the 30s and 40s. Because the ultimate failure of widespread conflictual violence is that it simply breeds more. To quote one of the most effective, but sadly killed too young, assassinated too young, advocates of non-violent resistance for change and transformation of the 20th century, Martin Luther King Jr., when he stated, "The ultimate weakness of violence is that it is a descending spiral, begetting the very thing it seeks to destroy. Instead of diminishing evil, it multiplies it. Through violence, you may murder the liar, but you cannot murder the lie, nor establish the truth. Through violence, you may murder the hater, but you do not murder hate. In fact, violence merely increases hate. Returning violence for violence multiplies violence, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that." End quote. More succinctly, Plato said, "Only the dead have seen the end of war." Violence breeds violence, and its siblings are vengeance, reprisal, and retaliation. Governments as well as individuals adopt these siblings and unleash them at will. To break the spiral of violence, one must contend with these forces of vengeance and violence at their root causes. All wars do end, either through attrition, intervention, diplomacy, or capitulation. Conflicts cease. But the end of conflict is rarely the beginning of a sustainable peace. Too often the end of fighting is merely the impression of peace, when in reality it is an armed truce, vacillating between possible futures. For generations, America, the United Kingdom, and our allies have appropriated to themselves the mantle of a global interventionist morality to create at least one possible future in post-conflict situations. We may have different perceptions as how effective this might be. Some might say at best it's often been too little or too late, or at worst utterly disastrous for all concerned. But something has changed. For the first time in modern history, some of the human consequences of this flawed morality has brought victims of their intervention in seemingly overwhelming numbers onto their shores and into their streets. Refugees, traumatized, at times half dead, physically and psychologically scarred, starving and despairing. They are as much the West's casualties as any of our armed forces killed or injured in recent wars. Violence breeds violence. From the violence suffered by traumatized refugees coming to our shores, a new form of violence is being embodied in the resurgence of reactionary populist political forces in America, Europe, and elsewhere. The populist slogans they scream and chant are no less than a complete repudiation of the so-called liberal democratic values, which until quite recently dominated so much international discourse. These new forces seem opposed or indifferent to any assertion of an international morality. They will use violence, rhetorically and actual, to secure their nation's borders, engender a patriotic siege mentality, and practice isolationism from global intervention. Rather than try to do intervention better, they seem to prefer not to do it at all. In the Middle East, Western influence has waned. Other regional powers have filled the vacuum, but those powers have historical and ideological agendas which are inimical to many in the West. The West is financially in huge problems with regard to credit, and some would say is theoretically bankrupt. The UN, similarly, is financially constrained and, of course, in thrall to the Security Council. The new American regime is inexperienced and so far lacks diplomatic credibility. And Europe is fragmenting as a political project. Can we see then that Western intervention is being reduced to targeted military violence for short-term ends, trade deals, and little else? Is the West becoming gripped by a moral inertia? If so, where will arise new energy for global conciliation and rapprochement? Where will it come? Russia, China, Turkey, India? A quote from the Holy Quran: "There is no good in most of their secret talks, save except in him who orders charity in Allah's cause, the good and the righteous deeds which Allah has ordained, or, and I underline this, conciliation between mankind. And he who does this, seeking the good pleasure of Allah, he shall gain the great reward." If the great reward goes to the conciliators of this world, in Christian terms we might say, blessed are the peacemakers, then we need an uprising of peacemakers and an army of reconcilers. Maybe the Aramea Foundation will be part of this uprising. The world needs a coalition of the willing who will work tirelessly and sacrificially for peace, demanding ethical foreign policies, educating the ignorant, reaching out to enemies and bringing light to the darkest places. As a person of faith, I know faith's shortcomings, but I also know its power to inspire and transform lives and situations. My own tradition, the biblical imagery of turning spears into pruning hooks, and a place where people will study war no more. While faith can play a role in post-conflict Syria and Iraq, they will need all the goodwill that can be mustered and echoing something the previous speaker said, a Marshall-type plan of economic and civic reconstruction unprecedented in modern times. Perhaps this is the cost of the West's repentance, the East's intransigence, and the Middle East's incoherence. To conclude, within plans for any possible futures in the war-torn areas of the Middle East, there must be included the future of Jerusalem, that city set on a hill, which is the rallying point for so many human longings for God and for a better world. We are all responsible. We are all implicated. We must all take action. Thank you.